I'll have the test before we got away. No. Oh. Sorry about the hearing that. Good. All right. Someone tell me what time it is.
12:31.
It's 12:31 and I am calling the September meeting of CT State Senate to order. We have a revision to our agenda to move President Paducah's remarks to after old business. With that change, is there a motion to accept the agenda as revised?
Take motion.
Second, any objections? Objections? We have an agenda. We're asked to review the minutes. Are there any requested edits to the minutes from our August meeting? Yes.
Not edit of the perfectly fine, but a request that we would rate.
Additional details in the minutes. Thank you, sir. Is there a motion to accept the minutes as presented? We have a motion, is there a second? There are many seconds, I suddenly feel like an auctioneer. Are there any objections to accepting the minutes? We have our minutes, thank you. I want to take just a minute to thank all of you for coming in person. Those folks who can't be here in person, if you could remember to please turn your cameras on if possible. We would appreciate it. We are doing our best to meet our goal of transparency by recording the meeting. So please know that side conversations that you might have might be picked up in multiple places. So just be aware of that. I want to thank, let's see, Meg Bangcott, Karen Case, Brian Lombardo, Andrew Frazier, Kevin Steve, and Andrea Mack, who all scrambled today when our primary way of recording the meeting fell through. And those folks here at CT State Manchester really helped. Campus reports, please come forward. It is a little distracting. You can hear it here. I don't know how to spell that. But when you come up as a campus and give your report. I want to acknowledge that when we give our campus reports, most folks will use multiple methods of collecting information. So that's anonymous surveys, personal conversations. So if we don't censor the feedback that we're receiving, right? We are reporting how our campuses responded. And that is simply what we are asked to do in sharing the state of the campuses at our state college senate meeting. The pleasure and honor of visiting your campuses during the town halls. And it has really been, you are magical. Thank you, Joe. This whole team up here is magical in what it takes to pull off these in-person events. So thank you to the Executive Council of CT State Senate. Being able to visit the campuses has really been an incredible honor. We knew, and I know from my impact marketing experience, that each campus is different, both in structure, in how folks relate to one another, and it's impossible to see just how unique they are until you visit and experience the cultures. And I think that this is really important as we think about these campus reports, because something that is an issue at one campus may not be an issue at another campus. And this, it also is a testament to the need for us to be in dialogue with one another as we are thinking about putting issues on our agenda, because they simply aren't experienced in the same ways. And that's not to say that we shouldn't raise issues that are happening in our campuses, but it is to say that the way we raise those issues and the way we take the temperature of how those issues are landing is important. So the campus visits have been really wonderful. One of the things that I am doing is meeting with campus shared governance leaders at each of the campuses, and that's also been a great opportunity. We still have gaps from our charter, from our charge, in how we formally communicate with our campuses. And so I want you to know that we are working on building those relationships to increase that communication. One of the things that we will talk about today as a discussion item are the task force updates, the online task force, and the scheduling summits. I want all of us to be aware that these two items are really important opportunities for us, and they are a direct response to the work that came out of committee work at the Senate last year. So the work that we do really does impact the college and has a profound opportunity to improve the college overall. And then finally, I want to share with all of you that I have been working with the student activity directors, and we will have student senators joining us very soon. We will have a student senator from the small, medium, and large campuses per our charge, and those elections are taking place in the very near future. So with that, I conclude my report, and I will open it up for questions. Thank you very much. We did move President Paduco's address to after old business. So that means we are moving to campus reports. And Tunsis, who is here from Tunsis today? Okay. Michelle, please come forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm Michelle Giannakopoulos. I'm the Senator at Large for Tunsis. And I want to start out the campus report today by highlighting some of the positives. We polled our campus community via an anonymous survey, and it was clear to me in reviewing the feedback that Tunsis is absolutely a student-centered campus. Our faculty are dedicated, caring, and responsive. They maintain high academic standards with the greatest integrity. Our staff are equally as dedicated and are, quite frankly, working miracles with resources that they have available to them and truly go above and beyond to navigate obstacles for our students. Despite the amazing work that's happening across the board, we have challenges in 4 key areas. The first would be morale, and then burnout, physical plant, and policies. Speaking to morale, 68% of surveyed respondents rated morale on campus as either low or very low. Across the board, there has been a call from faculty and staff for better relationships with management, all the way from the deans up to our CEO. Faculty and staff want management to do more to demonstrate leadership and build trust in ways such as being more visible, more engaged, and also more responsive when issues arise. Our adjunct faculty were clear that they love the work that they do, but recognizing that they do in fact outnumber our full-time faculty, they feel undervalued, and that contributes to the campus climate with regard to morale. Moving to burnout, we don't have enough student-facing staff on campus, and I know that as a campus, we are not alone in that. From our library, which does not have weekend hours and has limited evening hours, to our one-stop enrollment center and our disability services offices, among others. Telework requests are being blanketly denied for staff on campus without cause, which is contributing to the burnout that many of our staff are feeling. Our Guided Pathways advisors are no longer allowed to teach the College and Career Success course and have not been given enough justification as to why. The full-time faculty on post-2017 contracts are struggling to engage in meaningful service work. For example, opportunities for AR on our campus are extremely limited, and providing unpaid labor on top of a 5-5 load has become an expectation. Regarding physical plant, faculty offices and other high-traffic areas on campus, such as our library, are not vacuumed. The hallway in our faculty wing is lined with trash cans because it's the only way to get trash taken out. And the technology in our classrooms is both outdated and slow, and many times in instances minimally functional, which impedes the classroom experience for our students. From a policy perspective, there were many concerns raised about ACME, particularly using the self-reported GPA as a for our gateway courses in math and English. There were concerns raised about the rigor of online courses and the potential for cheating. Another staff member identified that staff appeals are taking too long and students are waiting. There are concerns about drops for non-payment being addressed in a timely fashion, and a difficult process for paying library fines, which is now resulting in unnecessary registration holds that prevent our students from progressing. Finally, there was a call for dedicated training for GPAs on the transfer process and more efforts around the education when it comes to how to best serve our students with their goals of transferring to a four-year institution. And thank you all very much.
Just as a note, I will be keeping time on our agenda. And so if people are getting close to your 6-minute mark, raise my hand just to cue you that was in.
Hi, everyone. I am Nicola from Three Rivers. Do I need that? You guys are doing. Okay, sorry. Thought I was loud, but I guess I'm not. We weren't smart enough to do a survey, but we did send an email to everyone and said, please send us an email with all of your issues or concerns. And we got quite a few. So I have kind of put them in order that seem more statewide and then some campus specific. So the first one that we received a lot about were the volume of email communications coming from Connecticut State. It was one of the recent email somebody was not very pleased with was in the body of the email. Please make sure you read your emails and attachment thoroughly responding. They were not pleased with that. They felt that it was not exactly sure what they weren't happy. Not only are the emails not being read, they are being deleted. They felt that if everything is important, then nothing is. So there needs to be a more judicious email strategy. Requests to fills for positions. It does not seem that those who are responsible are reading the RTF comments and that requests are being denied because the comments are not being read. Also, there is no feedback, or at least inadequate feedback concerning the request to bills and the denial. So the campus does not know where things ever stand with the RTFs. Overscheduling of online courses, and then the online course hierarchy in how those courses are being staffed. Because obviously multiple unions, 4Cs, AFT, and the classes that are running are the ones that fill, not necessarily the ones that are full-time faculty or part-time on the seniority list versus part-time not on the seniority list. So there was some issues there. How are drop decisions being made and the cancellation process? More conversations at the campus level need to happen to align with the needs of students in the campus programs. The unique versus cookie cutter of Connecticut State. Three Rivers had a 100% compliance in providing midterm grades for students pre-merger. Since the consolidation, the system has not afforded us the opportunity to continue this practice due to other banner use of the midterm grade field and lack of on-campus registrar persons with modified grading tables. Further, the system as a whole decided to not have a practice of midterm grades, even though we serve a population of students that greatly benefit from this feedback, especially when the data allows GPAs to do very intentional outreach. Deadlines for the incomplete grades of processes, there wasn't much, that was literally just in need, but something else. Adjunct to full-time ratios across the campuses are concerning, especially in light of upcoming NETCHI visits and the report that's due next year. Financial aid administration, regional directors and above having never set foot on campuses. Directives being mandated with no experience on the campuses and the community of students it serves. The administration should have a campus home and should have a requirement to work a day on each campus in the week. And then there was more about basically emails about faculty who teach in next term receiving emails for every term. The portal for NPP is not open until the same day as the deadline, 2 days to submit invitations. Blackboard Kaltura links broken during a software upgrade. Instructors who invest extra effort to create personalized, engaging content find it disabled. We would appreciate colleagues who take responsibility for fixing the problems they create. Receiving an email about a WebEx account being terminated. Some of the mandatory meetings are held via WebEx, but IT operations communicate with the officers on campus before threatening to deactivate. Attempting to follow up to convey whether my actions were successful. Lack of transparency with the May 24 migration. Some campus-based concerns are bookstore. The people who are ordering the books appear to be making decisions on how many books to order, assuming some students will order copies or will drop the course. One instructor needed 18 textbooks, but the school had only ordered 5. Yeah, so she was having to make copies of the chapters that were assigned. We had some issues with fire alarms. 3 Rivers was, but that's really specific. No admissions department, student worker budget, lack of testing accommodation center. We don't have one currently, or the one we do have is very limited in its time. All faculty, most faculty have to use office hours for accommodations testing. You know, that's something that other campuses are running into. That's pretty much it. Joe? That's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Nick Steve Bennett. I'm here to report out on Hubbard Valley. And before I get the staff perspective, I want to let you know we did meet with the staff. We had an extensive meeting, took a lot of notes, and we also followed up with an anonymous survey. So this readout really reflects the staff perspective at QV. And it's a standardization. Just wanted to make sure we captured what people feel. On the positive side, what's working? The team at QV is outstanding. Hardworking, supportive, focused on solving problems and really supporting each other. your colleagues that care, and that's really important. We also are very pleased with the one admissions application, ease of access to courses and other campuses. The processes, though challenging, are getting better. Procedures and processes in collaboration both on campus and with counterparts at other schools is really improving. So those are very positive trends. And certainly the use of the online modality is something that seems to be resonating very well with students, and we're happy to participate in it. Concerning what's not working or challenging, shared services was cited quite a bit. HR, purchasing, accounts payable, marketing, IT, all represented challenges in varying degrees on our campus. Limited marketing support for our campus, which is an outlier geographically in the state of Connecticut, the northeast corner. We feel this limited marketing is impacting recruitment, retention, employee development, and community outreach efforts. We seem to be rarely covered in in CT state newsletters. We know what we're doing, and we just feel a lot of the state doesn't. So that's an area for improvement. The CT state website is tough for both current and prospective students to navigate. Requests from CT state to provide various types of data and information with very aggressive timeframes, and again, working in a small campus. That certainly can be a real challenge to meet those deadlines in short times. Committee assignments, search committees, training requirements. Again, all of those efforts are very resource intensive, especially hit harder at small campus. There's been significant management changes at both the campus and CT state level. And that's been challenging as well. There's some confusion on roles, reporting relationships, responsibilities, and it's created some discomfort and concern on the part of staff. There's a lot of uncertainty and people concerned about that. It's up and down both within the campus and from CT state, but certainly use some improvement as well. There's a concern that's consistently expressed that CT state has taken community out of college. We used to, but it's starting to feel like we're now a state college. It seems to be on how big we are. 70,000 plus students, largest community college in New England, 5th largest in the country, et cetera. Some fear that we're losing intimacy with our community in Northeast corner. Process. Not requiring textbook information for incoming students and accepting a copy of a high school diploma as proof of high school completion doesn't set students up for getting off to the right start with their GPAs. Lack of a strategic plan and vision for CT state. There needs to be a clear plan of what the goals are, who owns them, and how. An improved fruit solution for students. Such a genuine connector for students, and we feel like we're really losing an opportunity to connect with students, open ourselves up to the community, bring employers in, and really help students to the campus. Overall morale on the campus, it was mixed results. I would say overall okay, but trending to the negative. Most departments are understaffed and under budgeted. Many employees feel that they're working above and beyond their job descriptions. This seems to be part of historical culture at QV, which has always been run quite leanly. But you can see that many employees are expressing burnout and fatigue. Some worry that colleagues will be exiting within the next couple of years in droves, which would really put the campus operations at risk. Also concern expressed by employees where their voice is not being heard when making suggestions for improvement. So again, this is the staff perspective, and also a pleasure to introduce the faculty perspective and Jane Mack.
I'm Jane Baddy, faculty rep, new this year. So I'm just summarising the academic senate concerns from last year. The CT state shared governance teething problems were discussed that we're all having. Various discussions and motions were put forward throughout the year, centred on who does what, including how organised CT state governance. The concern is that we're small and there's many faculty and staff doing multiple tasks, multiple responsibilities that perhaps are done differently at the large campuses. We, this year, to make some headway on the searching of courses online by campus. And I know that it is old business for the agenda right now, so hopefully we can get an update on that. Throughout the year, we've been concerned with the lack of adequate support for the Willantic Centre in our centre, not our campus. And this was discussed towards the end of the academic year as well. Concerns and suggestions have been shared with our former CEO, Heineck, who is Provost Heineck right now, so she's very much aware of our concerns with that. And that's it, short but sweet. Thank you.
Thank you. Norwalk.
Salami, teach math at Norwalk. I am the faculty rep for the college. And I think I'm going to actually comments in my list because I think my colleagues have been fairly exhaustive about the issues that we all are facing. And it seems like the issues that are being articulated by the other campuses are the ones that we're experiencing as well. So I'll give you maybe a brief perspective of how we stand. I'll tell you a little bit that's positive and a few things that are negative. From a positive perspective, I think it's consistent with what the other campuses do. We have a committed staff and faculty who are really interested in positive outcomes for our students, and that's why we're there. We're actually not there for the college. We're not there for the state. It is our commitment to our students that engages us, that enables us to continue to doing. Because it has become less fun to be here. It's been less fun to be an educator. I'll deal with that a little bit in terms of morale. The other thing I think we're noticing across the state is that our enrollments are bouncing back up. Both I think what's going on a macro level and maybe some on what we're doing to try and retain students. But we're not necessarily doing the best that we could. We're not necessarily optimizing that enrollment number. And we speak, all of us, about drops for non-payment. And it is an issue. And it continues to be an issue. And it's an issue that we have not dealt with, despite the fact that we knew it existed. And at some point, you have to take accountability for it and do something about it. So to give you perspective, and I've got some numbers, but I'm just going to round them off. About 1,250 students were dropped for non-payment of all their classes. So they may have been delinquent $501 and had paid for 3 out of 4 classes, and they're being dropped out of every single class that they enrolled in. So you take that 1,250 cohort of students. At some point, 60% of them were able to re-enroll, 40% of them did not re-enroll. We have about 500 students that did not manage to re-enroll. And so that's not 500 slots that were not filled because they got dropped out of all their classes. So you're looking at actually what closer to twice as many, 1,000 classes that could have had a person sitting in there. Multiply that by 12 for the entire system, and now you're talking about numbers that actually make sense. So we are facing a fiscal crisis, I know, with the state and for the college, and that is revenue opportunities that we are just saying no thank you to. Okay, and that's on us. And the impact on revenue is the impact on students, because very often courses that they're being locked out of. And by the way, the ones that were able to re-enroll did not necessarily re-enroll in the class that they were dropped from, because our math and our English fill rates are pretty much at 100%. IT stats, every stats class on the Norwalk campus was filled with minutes. So if someone got dropped, there were 15 other people waiting to pop in there, and that student got locked out, and they may have taken another class. And so when you get right down to it, they're not able to take a course where math and English is a co-rec, pre-rec. Let me just kind of deal very quickly with, I think what we're finding staff and faculty are feeling undervalued, their voices don't count. They feel as if work is being pushed down on them that they're not being compensated on because we're inadequately staffed, we have inadequate facilities. We have at Norwalk, where the state legislature appropriated funds to renovate that. I believe that renovation was supposed to be done almost 2 decades ago. We're still not started. And students will complain about the fact that you got the heat on and the air conditioning on in the same room at the same time, because once you turn on the heat, some rooms get a little too warm, so you turn the air AC on. It's all kind of mind-boggling. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to let me leave it at that, because I think my colleagues actually spoke very extensively about a lot of the other problems. I think though, my going away comment really is that we have great people at all the other campuses. They're committed to doing their job well. They're here. They love their students. Please, please, please make it possible for them to do what they love to do.
Northwestern.
I'm Jeremy. I'm with the library at Northwestern. So a survey of faculty and staff asked for feedback on issues of greatest importance to campus community that could or should be addressed by shared governance. While many important issues arose in the discussions that have been held on campus in the last weeks and months, the following 4 issues remain to be a common thread in these discussions. First is the generally business services and centralized inefficiencies. This category of challenges affects nearly all aspects of campus work and include a general lack of institution nimbleness that used to exist as a standalone campus. For example, the adoption of conflict policies against the institution that adversely affect programs against the campus is drastically more than others. The reduction in campus autonomy creates many situations where the needs of local students are not being met because one size does not fit all. A small selection of those examples include requirements of all courses to be net revenue generating within the program that's net revenue generating despite courses that are not. A small program like early childhood education on a small campus where the program coordinator who knows the most about the program and the needs of the students in it sees the need for certain classes to only be offered face-to-face for pedagogical reasons. But if other campuses are offering online versions of those same courses and there's no face-to-face requirement in the degree, some students will take the online class, which has a ripple effect on the ability to serve competing students on the ground. Reduction in quality and efficiency of business services. Examples include purchasing, banner, website information, marketing. The drop for non-payment process is flawed, as before. The reworks website inconsistencies, long delays in getting answers to relatively simple process questions. The centralized website is unnavigable and lots of important information hidden and not carrying browser searches. The bookstore and library issues. All campuses are having serious recurring problems with the current bookstore setup. It's unwieldy with too many errors and issues that take weeks to fix. And not replacing the director of libraries positions has led to a lack of library leadership and advocacy. The second main area mentioned was scheduling and advising. There's a lack of availability of some classes, especially the traditional courses. The too many online courses inadvertently draw students away from local campus offerings and the lack of consensus on what classes need to be face-to-face within a program. Inflexible and inefficient late start processes that create more gaps for losing students than before. Many online and especially L-RON courses, especially at the 2000 level courses, should have the cap lowered from 30 to serve the pedagogical needs better. Communication breakdowns at several levels of surrounding course cancellations lead to lost students. Poor implementation of the GPA system across the larger institution leads to GPAs at Northwestern being overburdened with serving students from other campuses. And then finally, the third area is just general funding issues. Cuts that have adversely affected several student-facing departments and services, including the reductions in full-time faculty stretch the remaining full-time faculty, making thin, especially on smaller campuses. Student activities are fewer. Library personnel are stretched too thin to keep the libraries open as much as we would like. Additionally, tutoring, peer-to-peer, and recruitment are also running low on personnel. So, generally, looking at the came out. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Bonnie Goulet. I am the campus advising lead at Tech Valley. This is my first time serving on CT State Senate, so I'm very excited about that. I'm also the staff council chair and on the executive committee of our local governance. This is Vince. I think I'm the senator at large for this. I think you're the staff. Senator Robin J. Gage is in the back there. She is our faculty senator. So if I miss anything, please let me know. I will say, first of all, Tunxis, kudos to you. I want to do a survey. I think that was great. But I will also say that many of our concerns are similar to what we've heard already. On the board, there are very similar issues going on at all. I think the ones that really stick out the most for us right now are, first of all, this idea of the ARs and compensation, which Elle knows about as she met with us and discussed it, that changes, reductions of what's been allowed for AR and compensation, and that's leading to a very difficult problem for us because we do not currently have somebody as president of our campus senate or of our faculty. That AR issue and the fact that, full-time faculty back to 2017 don't have the ability for ARs. And so it's just been quite a challenge for us, and our administration does not support additional compensation, any kind of compensation for staff. They feel all of the committees that still figure that out work to do. So that has certainly been a big issue for us. Staffing and resources is huge. We have 2 campuses, and our Danbury campus is exponentially impacted by not have enough staff and support down there. They have nobody for one stop, nobody for admissions. We do have some guided pathway advisors, but they end up having to take on multiple roles down there. So that is a huge challenge for us at that campus. They have a head count of 9 Tech Valley students. They have almost 800 students that are taking classes there, and they have 4 staff members. So that is a huge issue for us. But then even on our larger campus, we still have staffing issues. Our one stop is woefully under-supported and staffed, and that's hard. We now have 5,000 students. Again, our enrollment is coming back up, but I don't see how, I think any of us can see how we're going to continue to sustain having more students come in if we can't get some more of that support. Placement has also been a big issue for us. Because our systems for placement, since ACME isn't fully in place yet, are causing a disconnect, which for us results in very major equity issues, retention issues, and there's a huge disconnect with the processes because of the fact that high school GPA is the first level of placement. So we have a large ESOL population. So our system, if the student puts in their high school GPA, will allow them to register for English 1010. And unfortunately, as we met with some of these students and had to say, well, maybe it would be better if we did an ESOL test, we've had students test at a far lower level in ESOL but yet they could have registered directly into the English 1010 because of how the system works. And so that has happened repeatedly for us. And so we're seeing it as it definitely impacts that population of students. But if you look at it from a retention issue, if we're not placing them right properly the first semester, what are the odds of us keeping them? We're using up their financial aid if they're not successful with it. So something needs to be addressed when it comes to placement and that kind of thing. And compounded with that, so don't have a testing coordinator on our campus. And so it has been, certainly our ESOL population has been impacted by that. We do have some part-time proctors that will do some of the work both in Danbury and Waterbury, but we have not been able to get all the ESOL students through that pipeline to be able to test, to be able to register for classes. And then when students are trying to do the challenge, the second level of the ALEKS, we have a very hard time getting them through that, so then they're not placed properly for the math. We have phenomenal English faculty who have taken it upon themselves to offer proctoring. So not only we do the challenge essay, and not only are they scoring it, but they're also proctoring it like during their office hours. We had one came in over the summer, helped out. So kudos to them. But I actually had to say, maybe you should stop doing that because I'm not sure our administration is going to address the problem if they think we have all these Band-Aids. So we have to be really careful with that and really look at those ways of putting services in place that are certainly going to help our students and help with that placement. We also too have HR concerns, shared services have been an issue. Some people are talking about the RFT process. That certainly has been an issue for hiring our adjuncts, that there is not a lot of transparency there, both with the amount of budget that's there, with knowing what was approved and what wasn't, when that contract's going to begin. I'm fingers crossed, hopeful that maybe with the new HR person within CT State, some of that will change. I know, I try to be an optimist. But that continues to be a problem for us. Structure also, people mentioned that. We've got some very severe health and safety issues with a couple of our buildings that are much older. We're in a position where bonding was supported probably 5-6 years ago, but the governor will not release those funds. And so the concern is really, now that we are CT State, how is CT State going to prioritize and figure out what projects need to be done and how we can best leverage and try to get the governor to release some of those funds when they are there for schools to use. And then another thing would be also, people mentioned the schedule, that we still continue to have some issues with scheduling, how those are listed as far as online, they're wanting to hide some of them and that kind of thing. And one thing I think was very evident across CT State was we don't have enough English and math faculty because there were no English and math classes open for entry-level students as the semester began. It was very hard to build schedules. So once again, from a retention standpoint, how well are we serving our students if we're not putting them in English and math, or at least one of them that first semester? So I hope that, maybe with this new scheduling tool that they have, because that's what I keep saying is we need to know what is the demand of what we never have, and how we. So hopefully there will be a way to do that, because I do think it will be evident that there are some faculty that are leaving. Okay, Rob. Okay, thank you.
Hubert?
So my name's Joe Cullen. I'm the Director of Academic Program Assessment for CT State, and was elected as a staff representative for the New Britain campus. And I'll just report on what I know. Michael, I'm sure we'll have more to say, but there might be some people out too. We didn't get a chance to talk before the meeting. Biggest concern on the New Britain campus is staffing.
There is turnover. There have been positions that have been eliminated. A number of folks have returned to campuses, central office jobs, for various reasons. And those jobs are not being filled. Which of course creates some concern. Folks are worried about their job security. And overall, there's also confusion about the path forward. It's unclear what programs are going to be utilized and what are going to be devolved back to the campuses, since the original model that we started with for CT State has evolved since we started. So there's also confusion regarding lines of authority, which should surprise no one. Unfortunately, for a lot of folks at CT State, that means they get caught in this fire between campuses who assert their authority over certain things and central office that insists they have authority over those things, and that doesn't make for a very good professional life. There's also some concern about professional development money. We haven't gotten any clear direction. I know it's more of a union issue, but folks are wondering what do we have to spend, how to access that. Processes have not been made clear. And the same really applies to promotion tenure and sort of merit pay. It's been a real issue about being notified in a timely manner to this merit pay. And I'll speak for a moment about my position in particular, which what I'm about to say doesn't necessarily apply to the Britain keeping, but it applies to what I see across the system. My role is to foster the development of a learning outcome assessment system for the college-wide system. And obviously that involves some curriculum work, stating student learning outcomes, reading those outcomes, how those outcomes will be assessed, collecting that assessment data, analyzing that assessment data, reporting it. Some kind of basis, certainly every 5 years through the annual review process. And when I meet with folks across the system to discuss the development of what I just described, I get a lot of feedback to the effect of who's going to do the work, whose responsibility is it, does it fit within the role of a program coordinator, program chair, and then of course there's the issue of compensation. Faculty member who accepted a program coordinator position on a campus for a particular discipline was probably told at the time you're responsible for doing the academic program review for your discipline every originally 7 years, and this new cycle is 5 years. And that person said, okay, it's fine. But now they're being told, okay, there's all of your discipline folks across the system, and somehow you have to figure out how to do an academic program review for a discipline across 12 campuses. And there's no infrastructure, no procedure, or anything for that. I've been bringing this to the attention of folks for the entire time I've been in my position. It's going on 3 years now, and there still isn't a resolution. But the positive note there is I feel as though your provost has really got a handle on this. She's doing what she can to move this forward as aggressively as she can. So I have.
My name is Michael Panchallo. I'm Central Office as well. I'm the student team at ACU. Really have a lot of the same points that John has made. Joe has made some. What I had one additional point is an updated org chart, the one that was put out at the end. Said it was February when it was created, it's actually out of date. That revisited the org chart is, as I was positioning to different locations, would we please have that updated? So it's a great resource to have. But that, I will just say, I have the same comments that I've heard from people as Joe has mentioned, so I won't say it again.
Jill Flanagan from Middlesex. I teach health information management, and my Middlesex colleague is training online today. We collected our feedback in our two assemblies that we have on our campus, our student services assembly and our academic assembly. So we did this in person. And of course, the first thing that came up when we talked about our issues was the recent VR mandate to restore some services. And everyone took that as a very hopeful sign, but then expressed concern about how it would be carried out and how it would be funded. So that is definitely something people are worried about. In both assemblies, the level of staffing was a concern. Student Services Assembly felt that they were working long hours and having difficulty covering all the areas. They were understaffed to meet the demands they have to serve students. And then in the Academic Assembly, there was that issue, but also just concern about the portion of part-time, full-time faculty. And over all this, the concern about how many people it takes to serve governance, because we are a small campus and we've struggled to fill all the positions. And I know that that we have a governance summit coming up, and I'm sure that will be an issue that our campus and probably the other small campuses want to discuss, because we just are struggling to fill all of those roles. The other issue that is a constant one on our campus, has we've had it for years, but it requires capital funding. We have physical plant problems. Some big ones, some snake-shaped ones. We've had a little bit of issue with snakes, and then, you know, and then everybody chuckles when I say that, but there are people on our campus who say, well, I won't use the first floor restroom because I'm afraid of snakes. So our physical plant is a big problem for us. And, you know, that part might be a little humorous, but it's also serious when you're in these buildings all day. The other part of our physical plant issue is that we lack privacy. So it's nearly impossible to find a place to meet with a student for a private conversation. The faculty are all in offices that is multiple cubicles, open spaces. We are very tight on space overall, so it's difficult to even find an empty classroom if you need to talk with someone. So these space issues are kind of a day-to-day struggle for us, and they definitely are the top things that come to mind for our staff. And then we also, just overall with the consolidation, had some experiences on our campus with our workforce students where some of the information technology, like updating databases to make sure that those students were included, some of the processes had not been tailored to the workforce development students and courses. And so we have a concern that they're not having the same experience as credit students. And we would like to address that. And I think we raised the issue already, and I think we've taken some steps, but I think it's probably a more pervasive issue than what we've seen so far. Everyone else said everything else I have, so I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Manchester.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Matola, and the staff senator for Central State Manchester.
And sorry, and I want to say we do not have snake problems.
Thank you. You'll toast.
Or it does echo what everyone's saying, so I was gonna. So, let's just start with that morale. Actually, first, we collected our data a couple different ways because we started off with one of our interviews just to get some feedback. We also, when I went to certain areas, we found that some people were not comfortable with the one-on-one. So we did also end up implementing, at least just certain areas, a survey. And we did ask all the same questions, and then we did get some information from our Senate's College Senate, local college senates and so on. So overall, much like the rest of you, we're finding our morale tends to be on the lower side. People are very happy with our campus environment as staff and faculty. A lot of us have been here for a very long time, right? And issues are really more from like unheard from emerging communication issues. But day to day, I think everybody's largely happy with each other. It's just an impact. Still trying to get our food. I was going to give positive news here that we did get some good feedback on well. People were happy with the implementation of online forms. They think it's really helped their workflow. CMOS is less of a problem. It's we no longer have 2-hour lines of housing for a few weeks. It's much more manageable. People are happy that the course offerings, the students do have more access to courses across the 12 campuses because it finally allows some of our students to take that bioethics class that we show the hiring that's happened and financially, in our mind, fairly well considering the late release of FAFSA. So now we're going to come into our move the needles. A lot of this is like so what you were talking about. Advising in enrollment area, it would greatly improve the process and probably decrease our student frustration of students advising early. So that echoes back to the high school GPA, self-reported, making sure that they have all the steps taken ahead of time. We also found through the grapevine that math and you're available all year, certain times, and I think there's consistency across campuses, which, you know, one college, so it'd be nice to kind of smooth that out. Some of the things, and these are probably a little bit smaller, but like degree works, we're still missing the prereqs. I know this is something that we've been thinking about. And also the semester offered, which at this point is really more word of mouth, just going PCs to find out when's that math class, they can for specific math class reasons, how can we offer it there? Because that can be an issue for some of our students who need a class to graduate. We actually have to go contact other campuses. We've started this where we have the program maps broken down by semester of sequencing. So we do have that really nice SharePoint. I believe Brian put that together, or somebody initiated that, but it's not accessible to our students. So it's us, you know, if you're advising, you know well enough sequences for maths and English, things like that. Students that we used to. Selective admission catalog pages on the course catalog, they're not consistently written, right? So some of them will say this is inadequate physiology improvement requirement. If you go to a different one, it's not there. It's obviously there on the selective admissions page, but it's not messaged consistently in all the venues. So that causes a little bit of confusion with students. The big thing that did come up was that we are unclear on the budget allocation at the campus level. We've had a couple different departments come to us with concerns because they submitted their budget, it went through the process, and then like, for instance, our department had a student lady for funding. And then, so we look at student fees, they're not getting the portion back to actually properly service our students. And we're still trying to track that down, so that's like this more looking for as we go through this year. So Communication is a big issue, timely and clear communication for implementation of existing and new policies. So I'm coming from a science background, like I want my SOPs so that everything's implemented the same way at every single campus. We all put our personal touches on each campus, but overall, people should have the same expectation for admissions, or course requirements, which they are. And then I was gonna say, I think one of the best seen this is the non-participation email that gets sent out for the deadline by that's Anita Sparrow and Eileen Boyer. So you did to me, like that's benchmark. It's got the 3 critical documents, the PDF, and it's got very clearly written. There's a lot of concern about the integrity of online courses, which I think has come up in a couple of campuses. With recommendations to do like an online testing center, especially for something like math. Where we can teach the class online, but we need to make sure those tests are cheating, right? Things are done well. And then there's a concern about inconsistently between online and on-ground when the hybrids and elements across campus. Today, the HO7, so the department's releasing that. There's this across, teams don't have access, they have to go do extra steps. And then the central calendar, and this is something that we've revisited on and off. The central office has been very responsive historically, but there's a question to have more faculty input. Action daily, and some professors I think were struggled to find out 2 minutes. Courses were just to say, so they're really just asking for that more feedback.
Satanic, it sounds with Dawson, I'm Professor Matt. And around the Senate and Ms. China Bird. She's heading that we wrote a resolution, or one of our issues was about marketing, we wrote a resolution that China is handing out to share. Sorry. Many of the issues that are as well. One of the main struggles we had was just with sort of transitional leadership. We lost our campus leader. So we we only had 2 meetings, I should say, but we had 1 meeting. And that the social meetings operations, but in terms of faculty and student, we didn't have a social. So there was a lot of gaps and challenges last year. But fortunately, we have a new campus CEO as well as a new associate dean of students. And so I think, yeah. Hi everyone, as the sounds recorded, my name is China Bird. I am the new Senate at large representatives of Ms. Thomas campus. The initial changes we had that sounds oriented transitional leadership. You know, I have to get that. Staffing, particularly in marketing, IT, tech course, correspondence overall, the core persons overall, associate dean of faculty, recruiter, one-stop, and dual enrollment. We are still missing those positions. We need some brought back to campus, pending central office for tasks that were completed on campus, admission processes, recruiters, transcript evaluators are not specialized. One stop, nobody is at the front desk by the campus counter, which was specifically built for that purpose. Faculty in certain areas to replace retirements in need of full-time faculty. Too many online courses negatively affect students wanting transitional sections. Traditional sections, and it.
Sorry, traditional sections, they're losing the students that are canceling. Placement, as people say, using self-reported GPAs, not even official GPAs, self-reported, particularly in math. I heard someone talk about the integrity of online courses. What I know my department is pushing for math online courses, which is a campus requirement for the final all exams, and that needs to happen just so that there's some integrity in the courses from campus to campus. There's too many of them, and even have it required in summer as well. And then there's hiring is not the same statewide. DEI hired for campus, while other campuses hired an equity center coordinator. Our former women's center budget was used sort of in part over for DEI. There have been some shifts in the budget that didn't align with sort of the positions that used to be there. But overall, I would say our campus, the people on our campus are committed to our campus. They work hard. They're committed to the students. They put in those extra hours, but they're not compensated. And as someone said, should we stop? But if you really are in the business of servicing students, people aren't stopping. So it's hard to see that there are some challenges and some shortages because folks on the ground are doing extra.
Gateway. But 5 and 6. We're gonna bring the fast pop on the
Afternoon, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. So to gather feedback from our campus constituents, we discussed individual and departmental concerns at both our September staff caucus meeting, our September faculty staff council meeting, and then in some cases, individuals came to each of us respectively to talk about some of the concerns they had. And then lastly, we also did a survey out to the campus. There were several things that emerged. Some are campus specific, which we'll address with our on-campus leadership. But the most encompassing theme is a depletion of campus morale. We've hired our 2 new deans, which we're very pleased with. We are in a constant state of limbo due to the continuous interim CEOs and the lack of continuity among CEO decision making. Note that a lot of the things that are noted came specifically from the survey, and so they may not be necessarily our words, but we wanted to ensure we accurately express the comments of our stakeholders at the campus.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eva Samsel, Senator at Gateway and co-chair of Engineering Technologies and Applied Sciences. And I'm going to summarize under the category of morale and influx of leadership at different levels the response. That some things appear to be improving, specifically at the CT state. However, at Gateway, there seems to be a lot of ongoing PTSD. The instability of everything over the last 12 years for some is tiring. Furthermore, our poorly managed consolidation is now our origin story. It will take years to dig out, and it's hard to know where we are in the process and what we will be responsible for fixing. The second point is that people have voiced that CT State needs stability and Gateway needs a capable CEO who will be dedicated to elevating the campus. Many felt hope under our former CEO, Dr. Kalicki's leadership. However, some issues have been decided under him, which have been overturned or dismissed, leaving employees impacted, and feeling that it made no headway and the problems continue to grow. We do want to recognize that Dr. Manduco is dedicated to expediting the CEO search, including the local governance in the process. And on the campus level, a lot of processes were removed when consolidated, and new processes under the one college personnel created do not work. Some managers never seem to be concerned about the well-being concerns of their subordinates. There are under a lot of pressure themselves and do not have the leadership skills required of their position. Similarly, councils and mid-level managers and in some cases, campus deans appear to have no voice or power to exercise their professional judgment. People do not think CT State is thriving. We are too large, and it is very hard to get cooperation from all 12 campuses for input on courses, curriculum, campus operations, etc. Under the category of technology, employees are concerned that we still do not have adequate investing in technology to reduce the burden on overtaxed employees and allow for real innovative thinking. The CRM Advise program is an inefficient, extremely cumbersome. Advisors use CRM to document appointments and close faculty CPAS and repeat warning alerts, but that is it. It does not capture all the information we need to properly advise the students. The ID pictures in CRM and banner would help employees confirm that they are speaking to the correct student. This is a safety issue and a FERPA issue and integrity issue for programs. Faculty would like to reinstate the platform to confirm online learners' student identity. While it has been helpful to have campuses added to email employee emails, we need ID numbers to be connected to student email addresses because it is too challenging to try to figure out which John or June Smith employees are trying to reply to, with the correct information. Okay, we also have some comments about our air conditioning not working. I guess this is similar across CT State. And I think that's it.
We too have concerns about communication problems and inefficiencies. Specifically, our phone system in Gateway does not work. When students reach the call center, they're not getting the specialized, personalized information that they need when they end up going back in circles, end up in advising, one stop, and then those offices end up with just longer lines of people. Another area, and it's really the largest, I think, for our campus, is the website. And then you can already talk about it, so I'm not going to go into detail, but there's just far too many gaps in the CT State site that doesn't include content that did come over from our respective campus sites. And then also, when you get to, say, an office website or a function such as registration or academic affairs, you get to academic affairs, but there's no way to dig down really to your campus. And then if you do happen to find a link where you can get to your campus, the information is found, or it's not comprehensive enough to support the students. So we need to work on that. I think that needs to be a system action. I think that a lot of employees feel that we need better communication between departments and a strategic plan that is inclusive of input from all campuses and stakeholders to help boost morale and help people feel connected. As far as, oops, I apologize. Area of communication is the names of forms and the tiles that we offer on MyCT State. If we could simplify some of them, it'd be helpful, as well as some of the department names that we have, if we could simplify them. Our work with ATD for those campuses who have done ATD work, we know that from their research that the more we simplify and actually use the name that the students will understand, the better and more seamless their transition and their enrollment experience will be. Let's see.
My pleasure, it's okay. We will send this out to you. Thank you all.
Afternoon. Barry Robinson from Town Campus. I represent staff. So I'm just going to read through. I want to make note that our sample size was extremely small, not fully representative of our staff and faculty and the public. Make better efforts on our end, so connect with the chair of the CETA Capital Forum, and then we'll just. So we start with what's working. Promotion and marketing. The respondents noted that promotion of the college is positive. Better reports with regards to increase in availability and better access for students, regards to courses. Operations and security, I think that's more moving towards our campus, but there is a improved operations such as email, financial aid, campus security, the specific mentions of good security and room assignments. Committees, governance committees have started addressing issues functioning better this academic year than prior. Student focused improvements, several respondents praise improvements that benefit students, including access to services, and cafeteria operations. Again, I believe that's what regards to our campus. Enrollment, registration, and scheduling, coming to the registration and enrollment process has areas of needs of improvement. Challenges include course scheduling and faculty oversight, concerns, organizational structure and staffing, and too many administrators, especially area deans and campus deans were noted. Respondents also mentioned redundant positions and lack of sufficient HR representation on campus. Library hours and faculty access. Respondents mentioned the need for expanded library hours, which was mentioned before, and better faculty access to campus facilities. Communication and leadership. There are issues with communication between staff, faculty, and students, along with distrust, general distrust in leadership. Administration is often seen as disconnected and operating in silos. It's not HR and administrative issues. HR, they work in Senate and complaints about the burden of excessive administrative roles, particularly the campus management, or frequent. Additionally, too many committees and administrative layers that both CT State and campus were criticized. Morale is notably low. Respondents from campus reported also low micromanagement, culture, poor leadership, excessive workloads, are contributing factors. Being overly complex with complaints about deregistration process. The system presents to be led with complaints about poor leadership and management, excessive administrative burdens. That's pretty much it. Overall, there were some positive improvements in operations, security offering. So not all is presented to be as bad as it seems.
It's not time.
I'm Erin Bonnie from Atlanta. I'm gonna go over the pros that we received back. We did our surveying via a couple of ways. We did a survey that we sent out to our campus community. We have office hours, and then we have individuals that actually sought out senators and voiced concerns or compliments. So I'm gonna go with the pros first. First, we got a pro on communication from central office in New Britain. It's fine. We receive emails. People feel like they're being updated. There are a lot of emails, though. We did get that. Course and faculty collaboration. Course consistency across the system has improved, and more collaboration between colleges is beneficial. On our campus in particular, budget transparency was something that we were told that had improved. People are feeling like they're finding out more about what is happening within our budget.
Statewide initiatives such as DEI is being recognized, and governance and collections of concerns is starting to work as a statewide initiative. Leadership, CT State's leadership is open to office hours, and it is a step in the right direction. So our campus really enjoys the fact that President Madugo has his office hours and everybody can stop in. So kudos to you. We also have, let's see, student satisfaction. Students are happy to be back on campus and in the classroom. Our classes this semester are at an all-time high, and we're definitely starting to see that uptick. With the same thing, we are also in it for our students, and you can tell that we're all bringing in, making sure that our student experience is the most positive experience that they can have. Course substitutions are working better. Routine and stability, things are starting to feel like they're hitting a stride in a more consistent routine. The balance between statewide and campus controlling is improving. Oh, I used an abbreviation I didn't know, sorry. It's not tough atmosphere is persistent and has persisted despite consolidation, and faculty and staff support share critical information which fosters supportive environment and enhances communication amongst the faculty and staff on campus. Now Bonnie's going to go. I like how she says the other reasons when it's the cons, right? And a lot of these are also reverberate from those that we've already discussed. Thematically, we found some 9 different areas in which a lot of the feedback broke into. So the first one is more focused on the administrative structure and leadership. Too many deans relative to a campus size, lack of trust in faculty and staff decision-making. Leadership is disconnected, lacks visibility of events, and fails to engage with morale concerns. Leadership dismisses faculty and staff concerns and fears, and they fear retaliation. And I mean staff feeling that they may be share their concerns. Enrollment and course scheduling, we found that early course cancellations negatively impacting our enrollment. Competition between campuses for students through late start sections, poor handling of course change notifications, and inconsistent scheduling practices, lab and lecturing timing prior to voting day. So just looking at that balance. Under student services and support, there was a feeling of understanding in key student service areas, as well as issues with GPAs advising students inappropriately. And I can get into that if you have questions later on. It's definitely in our notes. We also are lacking ESL courses and insufficient marketing impacting community visibility in that area. Area of communications, we're feeling very overwhelmed by emails. So even though some of those emails are important, but too many and excessive is just not helpful. Disjointed communication between the departments is still very prevalent. Too many platforms for information storage and which creates confusion as to where to go to get that information. Under work environment and culture, we're looking at a lot of toxic work environment fueled by fear and lack of transparency. And the absence of shared governance and leadership support is still a big piece, as well as onboarding new hires is difficult and HR communication is very problematic. Under governance and decision-making, there was a lack of meaningful shared governance, so they're not talking to each other as well. And unclear processes of how decisions are made or issues to resolve those issues. Under technological and systematic issues, we found that CRM, again, many of you have already stated this, that the system is very lacking compared to Starfish. So we already have people wanting to have Starfish back on campus, as well as general discontent with how information is shared and organized by different departments as well as campuses. Under event and departmental support, campus's leadership prioritizes manufacturing, at least on our campus, the manufacturing events, but neglects other departments that also have some great programming, especially under continuing education and some of the other resources that are doing great work on campus. We also wanted to mention that there were 2 other areas that were brought to our attention that should be mentioned. We had comments such as
people on other campuses signing off on courses when a student does not have the requirements to take courses on a specific campus. And so that has caused a lot of discord, as well as placement consistency. Some of our campuses have placements centers while others don't, but it's not just only that, it's the resources that they also have. Some have proctoring, that they're outsourcing their proctoring services, and students are expected to do that same proctoring at home, but told when they get to another campus that those resources are not available. So consistency in programming and policy is also beneficial. Thank you.
All right, folks, JD was on our agenda. We need to remove that item. He is unable to speak and was unable to be here, literally unable to speak. So we're gonna push that to our October agenda. And we will also ask for an interim update. So right now, what I would like to do is give you a bio break. And we will come back together at 2:05. It is 1:57 and something seconds. We'll come back together at 2:05. I want to say that the executive council brought some fruit for you as well as some water to prepare. So please feel free to partake.
How are you? Yeah. She's an adult. Yeah. Yes. But you know, I'm so good.
Okay, so our bio break is over. Due to some logistics reasons, we are moving President Viduko to address us next. Followed by Mike Smith.
Hey, everyone, good afternoon. That's never asked you for this, it's kind of cool here. Also, know it's been a week, I'm sure, for all of us, I think it's really impressive. Have some updates. A lot has happened since the last Senate meeting. Process, now that Chief of Staff, process I do want to adopt is the updates I provide to ensure I provide to the Senate official. So you have it for record, so to discontent through to it after. And so send this in, make sure you send this in for later. But couple of updates since our last Senate meeting. Earlier this month, I attended the Higher Education Fiscal Sustainability Advisory. That board consists of legislators. It consists of two co-chairs of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Austin and Representative Walker. We have Secretary Chief Beckham, and basically it's looking into the finances of all of CSC. So we get an opportunity to present on free tuition program, formerly called, some really high level updates in terms of its impact for students served, and the that issues since its inception. So some of the details I shared, and we'll have, so the slide deck we shared, I will include that materials. Some of the details, so since 2019, since this program was launched, it has served 23,600 students, right? It's been a game changer. Every year, there's been additional expansion. Buildings. So the first year it happened, it was only for first time. And high school graduates and in high schools. And as of this year, this fiscal year, it's full-time, part-time, right? You can be a new student. You can be a high school graduate from any, you don't have to be a high school graduate. States. It's increased the minimum allocation for the and some other things too that I think have benefit. It's grown in its diversity of those who are benefiting from the program. So that first students who are benefiting from it. It's first time full time. And as of now, it more aligns with the diversity of CC State. We're about 60% student of color institution. I think that's a huge one. Making sure everyone, regardless of your background. We also share some of the student success impact. So we've seen a tremendous increase in retention of those students who receive the free tuition. And remember, the free tuition program is last dollar, right? So the requirement is you have to apply for financial aid, FAFSA application, right? We assess whether or not we're eligible for a Pell Grant based on basically your financial situation, the feds about it. And then whatever Pell is not covering in terms of tuition fees, right? The free tuition program is the last dollar to cover that cost. So in terms of student success, we've seen a 20% increase in retention for the Black and Latinx students. 20% increase. Those students who receive free tuition program, right? So a 3% increase in retention is phenomenal. A 20% increase, right? It's next level, right? So that's huge. Additionally, when you combine the free tuition benefit and our guided pathways advising, we're seeing over 30% increase in retention and persistence for our Black and brown students. And overall, we're seeing an increase in retention and persistence for all students who receive the free tuition program coupled with the guided pathways advising. And now we have the longitudinal multi-year data. So it's a game changer, and many states, many community colleges across our country have some form of free tuition. Right? So it's been next level. And we see obviously increases in the so kudos to everyone. Next, I mentioned in our last meeting that I was tapped by our board chair to lead the CSC healthcare task force. So that's something we kind of think about the task force in terms of what's the approach. Don't want to be duplicative, right? Because we do. It's a short timeline. It's less than 90 days. So we produce recommendations to the comprehensive report to the board of regents, and it has to involve our stakeholders, known the CSCU. And I was only limited to 7 spots on this task force. So we know that all things local market spoke within not only CC State, but CSU. So of those 7 spots, I've reserved 2 of them for within CSU. So 2 of those spots, I mentioned this yesterday to the board of regents. One spot would be the most senior provost within our system. That's the provost of Central State University, senior health team, health science team, and that's the health team at Southern University. They are the CSC Health Career Council. So there's a health career council at the level of the system office that's been meeting for years, and they sit on a treasure trove and repository of the information and data of all of our healthcare related programs across the system. So in terms of the size of the programs, the accreditor, the outcomes of the licensure, certification accreditation outcomes, the pain points. So why start from scratch? They can do it. So, Central's provost and Southern's dean will work in concert with this Health Careers Council to really analyze the data but then also to work with our governance bodies across the 6 institutions for our healthcare faculty who are interested in participating in some way, some form of this task force, right? So we check the box in terms of participatory and shared governance. The 5 additional spots in the task force, five members will be associated with these areas. So in addition to academics, which is within CSU, the other spots would be policy, force, philanthropic, health systems and employer engagement, innovation, national best practices, and invitations that are sent out to the stakeholders as of today. Them or a tenant or representative from their organization, we want to make sure that we have that engagement. Healthcare, health systems, and employers. There's a policy piece, right? So we're going to reach out to the commissioner of the Department of Health. She serves as an ex-official board member, right? It can't just be workforce in terms of we got to fill these jobs. It has to be how does CSU address the healthcare disparities in the state. And what's an example of disparity? Life expectancy delta between West Hartford and Hartford, Connecticut is 18 years. 18 years. And what's the mileage between West Hartford and Hartford? 3 miles. 18, like, right, it's right. They're neighbors. 18 years. That's absurd. And I really think the wealth of not only our healthcare portfolio across CSCU, in addition, we're the largest healthcare higher ed system in Connecticut. We should be at the center of healthcare needs in our state. So really looking forward to this work, collaborative, data informed. At the end of the day, I want to make sure it has the fingerprints of our phenomenal healthcare nursing faculty and leaders of the system. So there you go. The Board of Regents, really driven by our new board chair, has issued new pillars for CSC. These new pillars are ACT. A standing for access, C standing for completion, T standing for talent. And the charge of the board chair and the chancellor is that all 6 member institutions align their current strategic plans to these pillars. So right now, the 6 presidents, we're working amongst ourselves to kind of figure this out. And then in turn, we have to go back to our respective Senate bodies and say, okay, this is kind of the charge, let's see. Now, I want to stop right there because it was mentioned, I believe, maybe at the Gateway or Housatonic. Do go, all of these strategic things, top down, is no involvement. Housatonic. And I think there's some truth to that. So the current strategic plan that we have is the transitional strategic plan. It's pragmatic. It's primarily operational. It's that CDT statement turning on the state of the litany of things that many of you have said it's not working to the level that we. And we really haven't had, as CDT state, the process by which to work strategic. Right. So that's something that I'm going to propose in the spring that we start. A real comprehensive strategic planning process. So all stakeholders, all campuses, not just 12 campuses, we have 11 additional satellite locations. Everyone feels like they're at the table as it pertains to what does the next 5 years look like for CTC? What are we trying to accomplish? Based on data, based on the landscape here in Connecticut, based on the landscape of higher education. So I just kind of want to put that out there. But in terms of these pillars, more is coming from I'll work with Al to really work with this body. We'll kind of involvement. Before we submit any. We're at the final stage of the interview process for the VP of Work. So an announcement was sent out today regarding schedules for the virtual forums for the 4 finalists. And then I will be interviewing the 4 finalists. So we're close to the end of that process. And I know Gateway's right behind. So there should be some information for kind of Gateway campus CEO search as well. And then just the last few updates on my end. Challenges here. I have 6 lovely town hall reflections and things going through my head. There are a lot of things that are going on. There are a lot of things on fire, but I don't think everything is bad. And that's where I push back and fight, right? Because for a couple of things, our graduation rate is up to 60. Our retention is up significantly. Like we rank up there with the other New England communities. And then we're up in enrollment, so there'll be an announcement about our enrollment gains on Monday, but we're up 4% enrollment. Right, fall over fall, we're 4% enrollment in the CT state, 12 years. We've been up in enrollment fall over. First time, 12 years. Because that's been the narrative about the community colleges and the CTs. You guys down there. Say that 12, 14 years. First time in 12 years, we're up. Right, and we're seeing significant gains in specific students. So our census number for fall was 36,300. Shows a return to CT state further education. Right, that is a. Earlier today, I had a meeting with the interim president of Rhode Island, and I had to remind her, you guys are no longer watching. So y'all need to change your marketing or whatever, but that's been going on for a minute. It's us, right? I'm really proud of those efforts for us to be involved. In addition, our part-time student enrollment has risen 6%. Our Hispanic Latinx students have increased by 11%. 11%. Roughly. See a slight increase, a slight decrease in full-time enrollment by less than 1 percentage point. 9% of our students are enrolled in social degree programs. Right? Our students enrolled for institution. 2-year degree programs are better. Right? And Lutheran has seen 40% increase in their certificates since last fall. Tremendous work, despite the challenges, despite the technology, despite the glitches, despite what the hell is this we do? And we're still rallying, we're resilient. That's something we need to be proud of, and we'll tell the world we're tired of that narrative that you've been weaponizing, that we're down on enrollment, therefore you need to invest in this. Right? We serve 25% of all undergraduate students in the state of Connecticut. Period. That is what we do. So we need to be proud. We need to be proud, despite the challenges, we're really proud of our efforts. Financial alignment between the affordability, free tuition program, increases in student success metrics we're seeing. Right? So this whole thing about our students are doing poorly, that's not true. I'm not saying all of them don't have their challenges and issues. We got things. From curriculum, process, the policy, or whatever, I push down anybody that says, dude, this is all bad. I talked to a couple of presidents yesterday in Rhode Island. Yeah, we're down 12%. Sell buildings and they pay. So trust me. If we could be a Netflix writing team, y'all, we got 10 seasons, at least, just material. So I'm not saying it's all rosy. However, there are other institutions in this country and in this state that have more significant challenges. I think we've really been seeing. I think we've been resilient and we've responded despite the enrollment growth, despite the demographic. Doing tremendous work. I'm really proud of everyone in this room, colleagues across the state. Right? I get to celebrate this, but the work is so it's really cool to everyone. Those are my updates. Any questions for me before I sit my butt down?
For the refugees.
Let's go. Absolutely.
I just wonder if we talk about of refugees and their temporary protected status change. So they come in and with humanitarian support, in particular from India right now and from
Yes.
but also other states. They can get financial aid in the first year. They are doing everything to stay, so they change the temporary protected status, then they also can't get financial aid. If they have a one of the points in the message, we have 5 doctors from Sweden, and I'm crying for this country with the brain rate. Is there any way that we could follow what California is doing and add so they have temporary to our institutional aid? can we work on this with the,
I think we can do anything. I think it's gonna have to be statute. You know, I think these are the standing up in the room like you do every single time I see you. Like sometimes, like often we don't talk about it, right? We talk about CPOS that's meaningful, absolute CPOS in the thing. And communication, leadership, too many leaders, whatever. When we can get through that, that's stuff, like that's people, that's human beings. I'm almost been doctor. I turned 18, my dad had a sponsor, she gets shit back. So I did it. I know what that is. But immigrants have to. Services, right? So what are we gonna do about it? So Matt, John, we're gonna go like, what are we gonna do about it? Because these are still our students, these are still people who chose us for whatever reason. And it's a big challenge, not just in Marcus, across the state. So I know we have a follow-up meeting, but I think this is something we absolutely have to put on the docket in terms of things that we have to work on legislatively on the cusp of the biennial legislative sessions. Thank you for. And Bonnie was first, go ahead. Okay, but just by Smith, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask.
Yeah. Yes. So Eric Robinson, his questions regarding grants. Go ahead.
Thank you. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
More than episode.
Yes.
We can technically. I wanted to know. What's. See. Provided for the state. Try to talk about.
So a couple things. So Dr. Molly Locke is our executive director sponsored programs, right? So she oversees what grants for CT State. She's awesome. And she's putting together processes. I heard this from Peter. Putting out processes so there's consistency. People know she's that energy. She's vetting these grants before we get them. That's one. We are working to officially start the process to establish CT State as an institution, as HSI. 33% of our students are Latino, Hispanic. That's one. I think for all the events, I guess the question was, do we have to do everything from a grants perspective as college, or is still going to be the flexibility for individual a campus or a cluster of campuses to go 44 grant? As all the above. Right? I think for some of those big grants, it's as one institution. I think recently, Naugatuck Valley was awarded NSF. We support that. Gateways, automotive, NSF. I like that. I like that flexibility because we're not all in the same space in terms of and students are what opportunities we have. I think we have to have a conversation in terms of just what are the swim lanes, but also making sure that we're educating our stakeholders, you know, how to go about it, because we don't want to stifle advancement. We want to support it. We know we can do.
Dr. Martin, thanks for being with us today. My question is in regards to the new pillars. And I understand the focus is going to be accessibility for our students, you know, our completion rates, and also our talents. How are we using our students to be able to highlight our programming? But I also think that there's a gap of information that should be applicable to our faculty and staff. And I'm going to continue to plug faculty and staff in that aspect because I think we're also leading our talent to staff and faculty and our retention. Although students are staying, but our staff and faculty due to morale and burnout, we're losing incredible people that not only have institutional knowledge, but have some incredible assets and will want to give, but burnout, being devalued, not being heard is a huge issue. So I'm hoping that part of this this columns that we're also focusing, because I know we're bringing in a new HR person, but that has to be a collective leadership style too that is being done to support us at the local level, not just above. So I'm hoping that you can, when we're looking at the talent aspects
Yeah.
for us.
Yes.
If you could summarize.
So for our audience online, the one fund, Sullivan, right? Brought up the fact that though we have these utility, these new three pillars at access to nation talent. That at CT State, we have to also account for the talent as it relates to your faculty, staff, administration, it's burnout, it's you name it. How do you emphasize that and make that point of focus, at least for our institution? I think that's well said, right? And I think the town halls have been helpful for me. It's again, I can now that I'm in my third year now. Surprise, right? I know there's that's not in the last 2 days. I digress. But now I recognize names and faces. I see questions. So I might as well come up right here and blast them, right? But it's interesting being in the room. Either we still have faculty and staff who like, I don't want to speak freely because I don't want to be names. That's one. I think that's rude. But I think also too the automatic defensiveness of anyone that's received critique. I thank you. At the end of the day, you feel like something's not working. It's not working. I think I don't say it is. But you like to do it's not working. Good. So I'm going to meet you where you are. I think as management across CT State, say something, but also take a step back and ask the question, it's coming from somewhere. Let me work on where it's coming from, right, to bring solutions to the table. So it's been helpful. I think we have to work on ourselves. I'm really confident in Anna Rubinski when she starts, because Hudson County can be couples. Their HR might have worse than ours, right? And it really turned it around for leadership. We're one of the best places to work for community college in the country, right? So it's not going to be her alone. It has to be the collective alone. So thank you for that. So the question was the 4% increase. The 4% increase in headcount. And obviously we have 3 categories at the moment. So there is the headcount, there's the credit hours, meaning the courses that students are taking, and then there's the FTE, which is basically the formula that combines the headcount and credit hours. I like headcount for this people. How many more people are here? So I think it's multi-factorial, right? I think the free tuition program absolutely is helpful, because we're the most affordable institution of higher education in the state. And we're second only to Maine when it comes to the Northeast in terms of our affordability. I think that's a game changer. And I want to say something like at least 50% of our students on the credit side are not paying a nickel, not paying anything for tuition fees. Remember, today's college, we serve 7,000 students. We're massive. I think that's one. I think two, our applications were up year over year. Double digits year over year. Our applications for admissions were up. Applications for FAFSA were up year over year, right? And I think that's a testament in terms of like we've stopped the bleeding. And I think lastly, people are here. It's more expensive. It's just more painful. I think when people get nervous, I go get some form of education to try to better my circumstances. I think it's a lot of issue, but it's all upward. It's all trending upward. And I think that's great, despite our infancy. Just imagine when we connected us. Dive into the briefing in terms of the enrollment season for the fall, to say what works and what was working. That's it. I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
President Medico, Mike, you're up next. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see people in person that I've only seen on screens in the past. So welcome, and I haven't met you individually. It's great to see you. It's nice to be back home in Manchester where I spent many years. Just have a quick scheduling update on behalf of the scheduling team and kind of continuing a theme that was brought up last year about banner and course searching. I did do a written report and it's posted in the folder for today's meeting. So if you haven't seen that, I know Steven's going to use that towards his minutes. There was concern last year about canceling and rescheduling sections in the spring, fall and spring. So I just wanted to share that we canceled 378 less classes. We still canceled 712 classes, but last fall was about 1,000. So there's improvement there. And we've rescheduled 104 less sections, which is 99 sections were rescheduled than last year. So I think we're getting better at our scheduling and kind of more effective and more efficient. Our average class capacity decreased by 0.2. It's 23.1. Small classes, that's one of the things we're proud of, right? And our class size, not every class fills, so our average class size of enrollment increased by 0.2. It's 18.9. So I don't know if everyone knows that average class size is less than 20. Our fill rates overall increased from 80% to 82%. Online fill rates, which we really focus on, and we work with all of the campus academic deans to try to coordinate, increased by just over 1% to 84.6%. I heard earlier in the concerns, lots of concerns that there are too many online courses. And, you know, there's concerns of folks from one campus, students from one home campus taking those at another campus. I think we still have improvement as far as a fill rate for online, but we're at 84%, which is still, it has improved. Enrollment overall, seats filled increased by 4.5%. We ran 169 more sections than last fall. Increases were in CCS 1001, there were 41 more sections. And instrument-specific applied music lessons increased by 41, which I think is great, right? I'm a musician, I love music, so that's great. We also ran 117 more late start classes. And yet we still filled them at percent higher, 90% of our late start classes is a fill rate, 90%. So I think often we reschedule things from the main term to late start. The students have that ability to join late, get their financial aid in place. I also put in the report, you can read it, some more data from JD's general census report, just some overall data, which I think is helpful, talks about our student population, so forth. I will point out, and I know we have an agenda item about the scheduling summits that the provost has asked the school area deans to coordinate to try and improve scheduling. And I think Elle probably has an update there based on last month's meeting. And I'd be happy to talk about those if people want. I have a Lucian update. So the Lucian is the banner system, right? And as I say sometimes, it may not be the perfect car, but it's the car we bought and it has the bells and whistles that we have, whether we like them all or not. So we reached out again about the issue of defaulting home campus in some way. Quinnebog Valley, I think the issue came up from Quinnebog, but it's come up also from other folks. Could the sort results be sorted by home campus? Could in the search engine, the home campus be defaulted? So I put a little graphic in the report. You know, when students go in to browse classes, if they're logged into the system, could their home campus then result in a default of the two campuses for Quinnebog, for instance, Davis and Wilmington? It's not available currently in Lucian's basic product. So it's not something we can turn on. There has been feedback to Lucian that they should include that in their basic product. It's actually out in their product database as an idea. They have these numbered ideas, and everyone in New Britain has voted to support that idea, to have that available. So there's two ways to do it, right? One is it's in the product. The other way is with a customization. So in order to have that, we'd have to customize banner. In New Britain, we don't customize banner. That has to occur at the system office. System office IT runs our instance of banner, right? So my job is to figure out kind of can it be done? The second part is should it be done? And I'll let all of you work with your constituencies to decide, is that something everyone agrees they want? And I won't weigh in on that because, you know, there are some people who don't want that, but if it is something we want, and I will continue to investigate it, you know, either way, we would need to ask System IT to do a customization of that search screen. Customization's tricky because we have to update them every time there's a product update. And we have to rely on System IT and resources. For instance, Banner, Lucene is moving to a SaaS system, SaaS, which I don't know much about, but maybe customizations would be lost and have to all be rebuilt in the SaaS system. So I know that Jacob, who was the senator, right, says it seems like a simple solution. Look at the student record, take their home campus, and put it in the search. Unfortunately, it's just not that simple. But we will continue to investigate it and find out if it's something we can do and if it's something we want to dedicate resources to. Because it would help students. So that's kind of on the filter side. On the results side, when you get your results from courses, if you haven't chosen a campus, you get all the courses at all the campuses, right? And unfortunately, the campus column is not sortable. If you've done this, you know. You can sort by CRN, you can sort by title, subject. You can't sort by campus for some reason. That's another thing we've asked Lucene about. And they simply told us that is not a sortable result. Just share the bad news. I know it doesn't make sense. I know. So we will continue to push them and recommend that become a sortable course column, a sortable result column. I mean, students can manually enter their campus and find courses. If you put in Quinnebog, you will get the Quinnebog results. So just a quick update on all of that. It's never as easy as you think. I think that's my update. Questions? Yeah.
Portable line structure.
We look, I have a graphic here. It is not currently sortable by instructor, and that is not a base Lucene function. We have asked that it be sorted by every campus, by the term, instructor, everything. We've asked for that. Yeah. And I know that President McNichols is not ready to get on the phone with President Lucene and say, fix these things. And I know you will if we need to. But again, you know, if we're going to ask President McNichols to make influence something like that, we want to make sure we get what we want. And we can't keep going back to the well asking favors. Right? So I think we need to really think about what we like and what would be helpful. And I encourage your input. So yeah, great question, Jim. Yes, other question, yeah. Oh, sorry.
What I would like to do is
If we could get all of the questions and then let Mike answer them. So let's go ahead. Bonnie, then Jane, then Jill, then Hannah. Son. Bonnie.
In regards to the 65% of students that are taking one, is there any surveying of those students to see if that is really, or whether that was their option? And is there any research on how successful they are? Is there a difference in students that have been around for a while?
So preference to take an online class, if that was the only thing offered, as well as success in that class. Okay, Jane.
This may not be wanted by everyone. So should we have that conversation next meeting?
So Jane is asking, do all campuses want these certain capabilities? And Jane, I will say proactively, I think that is something that a conversation that we do need to have, that we will engage with via email to start to discover that. Who was next? Jill.
I'm a little worried about your way you express concern about support groups. That invested in nothing.
we don't have enough.
So concerns related to customization and the student experience? Okay, Hannah?
Two things, one is the experience for students on the phone. Yet a lot of our students access. Our SL program, for instance, the courses on the blended and the credits are listed in a different order. It's active. And then on the credit side, it's by level. First. Right, and also we would want the credit passes to come up first, right? And then the blend. Something we can sort out. Once it's in there, that's it.
So ESL classes in particular, the presentation or the academic side of the house versus continuing ed, and how do we want that to present versus how it's being presented, but also the student experience on the phone, okay? Asante.
They offer other packages.
So, packages related to Elysium.
Yeah, so in terms of the search and all stuff, and then secondly, how long are we like contracted to?
We don't offer a package that has it.
So contract length for Elysium, the other piece of that is going to be, there are very many, companies that do this kind of work, but Mike can weigh into that. Any other questions before I turn this over to Mike?
All right, so. Thank you for the note. First of all, Ronnie, there's not been surveying that I know of. I think it's a great idea. And I would welcome people's help with creating surveys. I know recently in the Dean's Council, the academic deans meet annually under the provost's leadership. And there have been lots of conversations about some of the concerns raised about how many online sections should we have? What if one campus wants only on Rhino, but there's online sections of the same course offered elsewhere? There may be some technological solutions of limiting students to courses by campus. A lot of those solutions are manual and resource heavy. So not that I know of, although I do know that some campuses have done surveys of students to find out their preferred modalities. And those surveys, while maybe specific to a campus, are being shared among all principals. So there's some conversation. Did I capture the whole thing? Or was there a second part?
It was.
Yeah, and then and really that's kind of, to Joe Cullen, the assessment of online learning is really going to be crucial as we move. I think assessment of online learning addresses a number of things. There's concerns about verifying identity, there's concerns about rigor, there's concerns about, is the online course at this campus the same as the online course here? There's concern about course packs and plug and play and all of that. So I think assessment can drive a lot of that, because when we find out students aren't learning what we say they're learning in online courses, where they are in these courses but not in these courses. And again, it's not assessment of the faculty, it's assessment of the learning. It can help answer a lot of those questions. So, second question, is it wanted by every campus? I think I'll answer that. I do know that there are some small campuses have seen increases in enrollment from non-home campus students. So as Nuntuck is up in enrollment, just mention as Nuntuck, and I think they're getting a lot of students in online courses that have a home campus elsewhere but are interested in that online course. And whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I won't weigh in on, but it's just an effect that's happening. And I think it certainly can help for online courses that might attract a small number of students, but statewide, we can get critical mass turnovers. And if all sorting was done or filtering was done solely by campus, that was always the problem. Having worked in this construct, there were courses that people wanted to run, they could never get more than 10 students. But if students statewide see it, now suddenly there's 18 students or 15 or 13 or whatever the cutoff may be to run it. Ongoing support for customization. Yes, Phil, that's a really important thing. One of the reasons that, one of the positive effects of the merger is that we have the most updated version of Banner running in the cloud. We were running Banner with servers in the basement of 61 Woodland Street, a whole team of people to support that. And we were 3 versions behind because of all the customizations. We could not run the latest version of Banner 3 years ago. All the things that people liked before, many of them were customizations, and we simply could not keep up with those. And we would need the resources, should we choose to do customizations, to continue to do that. Don't quote me on the 3 versions, I know we were behind, but it was more than just like one version. Now we're running the most modern version. I'll jump ahead to Ms. Salzman's comment. We use their base product. The search engine comes from them. They don't have other search engine available to choose. So everyone's upset that you only get 10 or 20 results when you search. That's a bad thing. We've asked them, they get lots of feedback that it should change it, or at least let us choose how many results we get. That comes from them. That's the transmission of the car that we have. You know, that is the way I say it. Banner is $1 million. So switching is a huge endeavor. They did go through a process a few years ago at the system office to look at different student information systems. It's a huge migration to move from Banner to something like PeopleSoft, which is the other big one that's out there. It's costly, it's resource, it's people, it's training. You know, again, we all know how to drive the Banner car, whether we like it or not, and whether it's expensive enough. You know? So I hear what you're saying, but I think we're locked in at least for a little. We can continue to get feedback, and President Duca has said to me, you know, he will call the president of Lucy and say, hey, can we get this fixed? But, you know, we only have so much control over something. Phone, Anna, you know, when you said experience is different on the phone, I'm going to show my age for a minute. I remember people dialing in on the phone to register for courses by punching keypads. Now, you were talking mobile phone, right? Cell phone. Yeah, Lucian is supposed to be mobile ready, and it's supposed to look better on the phone than the mobile app. So we'll continue to push that and find out where it is. Again, if we're paying that much money, we should have a version that works on the phone. As far as the ESL sorting, you know, courses come up in a search result. I set by subject, happening in first, then by course number 1001, then by section. That's the way they sort. You don't have control over that. So credit and non-credit, I believe, are different searches. So it's hard with a program like yours with their blended classes or trying to get credit and non-credit results. And we don't have much control over putting, you know, credit on top of it. Just don't have control over those results. So, I think I covered them all. Tamika, anything to add?
I just wanted to talk about the app. Tamika?
Oh, yeah. For the people online.
I just wanted to comment on the app piece that we do have an app, right, with the Lucian. However, it is just as shiny as Lucian's, right? And so we've delayed rolling it out because we really are trying to make sure that we are doing our homework, that we are assessing other products, because this is an opportunity for us to look at another product and see better to have better functionality. So instead of just rolling out what they provided us, we're waiting, right? And so we hope to be bringing that process to an end towards the end of the semester.
My time for one more.
Very quick.
So just because they have to do it scheduled, so that students are not sorted by campus and they sign up for classes. We got an improbable commute report. Do not believe we still get that. And if not, is there automated email to the student that says, hey, you know, you signed up for classes that.
Sign up for 2 courses at campuses 50 miles apart, and they're a half hour after each other. There was a report that was generated, improbable commute. There's no way the student can drive from here to there. And does the student get a notification? My understanding was the report still exists. It should be going out. Tamika maybe could confirm. And I thought that that also sent an email to the student, but we can look into it,
Yeah.
right? We can look into it, because that was what was happening in the past. Sorry I didn't have better news, everybody, but we'll continue to work on the default campus. Again, some people want it, you know, we can look into that. Thanks.
Right, folks, now we're going to enter the experimental phase of our agenda. And that is because we're moving to the discussion item of the online advisory task force. And there's really no good way to do this with our online folks. So when you came in, hopefully you picked up the draft of the online advisory task force, as well as the draft scheduling summit framework. If you don't have those, they should be at the back of the room. And what I'd like to do is ask you to discuss the online advisory task force at your table for the next 5 minutes. And then we're going to take questions, comments, thoughts, concerns related to that. So for the next 5 minutes, you are reading and questions related to the online advisory task force.
That would be my question. And
Steph, like, I have a question. Don't worry.
It's not money?
I want to know why our Hugo doesn't have blown up tires. No. I gave us a Hugo.
Yes.
Those are not accepted. They are not accepted. They're right to and
So clear.
No.
There's nothing worse than an upset students that I go into the class, and now I have to pay for the second time. Second time.
Oh, that. I hear you. So I'm now going to ask you. Identify. I'm going to ask your position again. As you have identified strengths and weaknesses in these drafts, one copy and annotate one copy from your table to capture your concerns, your ideas. So there's one copy that's annotated, the good, the bad, the bad. We're going to collect one from each table. If you don't have a lot of feedback, you can go on and move to the next. What is it? The scheduling slides. You can move to the scheduling slides. Yes. They just sign. So I just added a question about lunch time. This is one of the first ones. Oh, wow, it's. Yeah, this is it. Here's the one.
What's the difference goes?
It's like, it's not necessarily, it's someone else. I took this.
We're going to go ahead and transition to the scheduling summit drafts. We're going to transition to the scheduling summit drafts. Again, we'll ask you to read them, and then each table annotate your suggestions or your concerns, and we'll run these up in about 5 minutes.
I just take care of.
I say that happened.
And I don't.
To talk to each of them.
Yes. But they have me. Yeah. I'm so happy. Yeah.
Folks, I'm going to ask you to make sure that you are cleaning up your feedback. The other thing I want to say is you will have the opportunity to email feedback. So Ariel, if you go back to your campus and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot this thing, you can, of course, email feedback on both of these tracks. So this is not a 1 in 10, this is just the feedback. So in about 3-5 seconds, we're going to transition to the first committee meetings.
I see you writing on it. Who has drafts? It's fancy for you. Gosh, I love it. Oh, it's not right. And they wow, it's big. They have a range of that. And there was a shirt that especially the tiniest. I love it when I picked out my last slide. I probably value them. One of my house deposit here. Spots. So when I am well, she has negative.
So if you have an attention, please. Benjamin. One of the things that I am really excited to hear is the amount of dialogue in this room. And this is something that we don't get to physically experience. So I want to thank all of you for coming today. I know for some of you, it is a very long drive. For some of us, it is a very long drive. And yet we will work better together for having come together. And that's not to say that those folks who were unable to make it, we know they missed something, but they do too, right? They didn't choose not to be here lightly, and we know and we respect that. So if I do collect your annotations, please make sure you know Alan and Bonnie. But now we're moving to the second part of our experimental piece. And this is not perfect because there are a couple of people who will be missing from each of these committees. But for session 1, it is admin HR, bylaws, and elections. So somebody from admin HR, please raise your hand. All right, Thayer. Everybody, please stand up. Admin HR, you are going to move to that back corner. I believe charges for your committee. Grab your charge. The goal today is to read your charge and to identify a chair. As you know, we do not have a release for co-chairs, so we need one person to manage setting up your meetings, capturing your notes. There will be monthly reports. So admin HR, there, move to that back corner. Thank you. Someone from bylaws, please raise your hand. Topper, stand up, my friend. If you are on bylaws, please migrate over here. We charge, same goal, find a chair. Elections, Michelle and China, please join together. Come to the front. What Sam was saying. Stand up. So
Chairs.
Michelle and China coming up front for the elections.
Got a lot of her.
It's budget, it's budget.
What's not, yeah, that's the.
Oh, that's like, oh, okay. Oh, so I'm homeless. Okay, all good.
I can't remember the other committee I'm on, bookstore and which one am I on? I can't remember. And okay, so we didn't do any of those. So what do? We just stand pretty.
I'm with you.
I'm homeless.
Yeah.
Sound like.
I don't charge.
I thought that was in the budget. That has a budget. Yes.
Same, or, I guess I'd be hang out. Store that's. Yeah.
So, free back. Thank you. I'm all for.
So, we had one person emerge as the chair. You were able to facilitate that. That's really the intention, because we want them to transition to the next committees. We are moving to transition to the next committees. I need someone please tell me who's on the store committee. Who's on the store committee? Stand up, Leah. Can you be it does feel like, see, just the mere mention. Mia is going to, you are going to gather around Mia if you are on the bookstore committee. So, bookstore, she's the one person in the room standing. Two, you know, Nicola. Finance, apparently there. Budget and finance, there, and then enrollment management. Enrollment management,
You want budget?
But we have time on this. Yeah.
Someone is already on lecture.
People work with it. Yeah.
This is the final. So
So now for this meeting, it's just election the chair. I think it's the election. I don't know.
No, I mean, so much.
yeah, because I'm like.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
So I would agree with that, so.
Yes.
This to
Here's what all of you see.
Okay. So I think we should work. So I feel like so.
That what we learned about my clinical check. It said. For all we're doing is working here, just give it sure government to your CEOs to get better. So the business of our life, the most important is just our special needs. So don't take that side for November. The rest of it. So that's a lot of one. Yeah. I understand. It is our responsibility.
Yeah. Being right. Yeah.
Rachel.
Like wedding.
Some of that. Yeah. Round situations.
I just sort of failed in this, but it's like I think the bus would be 2 to 3.
That's three is the direction. So are you saying, so like, I just. That one. Now. That's.
And that's, it's like,
Yeah.
well, this is so much. I did also adjudicate. Like, plus they, every change this thing. And there's. Kids like that. Stay with it, but it was always just.
I also say.
So there are a few things that we need from you. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I started emails that have, that are committee centric. So bylaws has an email, elections has an email, Bookstore has an email. Someone from each of those emails needs to reply all and share with me who your chair is. And then I can make sure that your chairs are scheduling your meetings, and provide feedback on your charges. Okay, you can also provide feedback by comments in your SharePoint. Right? Very soon, you will be receiving an email from the Budget and Finance Committee related to restoration of student services. With your CEOs to get that list so that we are informed about what each campus is proposing. We really need that ahead of time. So your budget and finance folks will be reaching out, asking for your help. Do we have any housekeeping items that we haven't addressed? Right. Before you leave, please make sure that you get your CT State pen. That's in those little blue packets. Jen, hold up your little blue. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Putting shared governance.
Shared governance. Shared governance is going to be.
Assessment.
Shared governance assessment is going to be after we adjourn. I just made that up, but I'm going to know. Motion to adjourn. So moved. By those. Thank you.
Okay.
Very good.
Up there, you're like on the big screen, you're like.
The shared governance thing, because I think I'm on it through Congress.
I think it's not.
That's shared governance.
Wow. gain by a third.
Well, no, actually, yeah, I think it's out of some of those. Yes, that, yeah,